Originals, episode 4, titled Girl in New Orleans. This episode added a lot to the series, which I really enjoyed. It added, multiple elements, and it had a few surprising moments, particularly the end of the episode between Klaus and Cammy, but I'll get to that. The preview for this episode had me really excited because obviously, Davina was basically going to be, out, in the city, and in the preview they do show that she and Klaus have an interaction. So I was really excited for this episode. It wasn't as dramatic as I was hoping for, and that's mostly because I really thought that Klaus and Marcel would, cross paths in this episode. But I think we won't get that until next week, based on the preview at least. But I still enjoyed this episode a lot, and it played the more subtle route compared to the over the top insane suspense route. But it was a really well done episode, and Klaus was able to trick Davina into trusting him at least a little bit. And it's interesting, he made her angry and stuff, and then killed the guy, excuse me, and he made her think that she did it. And he just played his role like he always does. He plays the calculating character whenever he's generally, like, when he's older than someone, he's always able to play them well. But it seems like whenever anyone's been alive hundreds of years like him, he generally doesn't get to do that, and he kind of just goes the angry route. And that's generally how his plans work. Like, they're very manipulative still, but it always seems to revolve around death. And this one still does, but normally it's pretty permanent. Generally, he kills someone and it's permanent, and no one knows that it's him, or he kills someone in front of everyone, like he did with Marcel, to kind of get into the fold even more so than he already is. But it was really well done, and he tricked Vivian into thinking she was the one who killed him. And then of course he saves the guy and says, you owe me one now because I helped protect this guy that you cared about. And it was just really good. And his ploy using Cammy, and him basically using her, just she's obviously going to be used throughout the rest of the series now, but he uses her on and off, or I guess it's not really on and off, but he just goes to her when she has information for him, and she basically forgets everything once he's gone. And as soon as he comes back in her life, or just he's just around her, she instantly remembers everything about him. She remembers vampires and knows all about Marcel and all of that stuff. And then of course when he leaves, he pretty much wipes her memory enough so that she won't pretty much freak out and just run away from the whole situation. And in this episode, we find out where Davina's, like, her house is, I guess, her room. And it's in this old church where a massacre took place. And we meet the old priest, or, like the old priest who moved back into town. So I think he'll come into the series, every once in a while, but obviously he takes Vervain, which I thought was really well done. How Rebecca asked him, and he acted like he was under control. And I'm assuming he knew that the room was under a spell, or at least he could assume it was under a spell because he did know that it was for Davina. So, however he knew that already, I'm sure he was able to guess there's going to be a spell. And, I'm sure he also assumed that because I would assume he checked the casket, or he knew the casket was there. So him knowing the originals were back, it may have, played a role in him flat out giving Rebecca the information. Plus, she could have just killed him if he knew. But I thought that was interesting, So she goes to the attic, and this was probably the best part of the episode, really, aside from the ending. We find out that, Elijah isn't daggered anymore. As soon as Davina took out the dagger in the beginning of the episode and put it back, she pretty much screwed everything up. She canceled the effect because, the ash from the oak tree, I would assume, just kind of came off. So, one stab and then you're done. But that I thought was really well done. And so he's awake, and he kind of brings Rebecca into a memory that only, he and her shared. And I thought that was really interesting. And so he says, I have a plan. I'm going to stay here pretty much and wait for her to get back. And of course he wakes up at the end of the episode, And him being him, he flat out said himself he'll try to make a truce pretty much so that there's no more fighting and no more death, and he doesn't have to worry about Haley and her baby being killed, which once again is another great thing that was done in this episode, just hinting more and more at the fact that Haley's baby is very special, and it's pretty much healing her because it's Klaus's baby, so Klaus's blood is in her, and that heals her. And something I noticed, and it could have been completely random, is that when Klaus was with Davina, there was a point like right when her powers were starting to like really go crazy that his eyes sort of started to they went black and had like the gold rings for when he's sort of like the wolf. And the same thing happened with Haley when she was out in the forest and she pretty much killed all the people, and she said herself she didn't remember, so it probably was the baby, you know, maybe subconsciously taken over. But she killed all those people. She took out the people that were chasing her, and then of course when Rebecca came in to help her out, Rebecca was taken down by the arrows, and so was she. But I guess she kind of got amped up with her wolf mode pretty much, and she killed those people. And who knows if she actually turned into a wolf? And as I mentioned before, I think that's kind of over since she got pregnant. But obviously it's still a part of her, of course. But she killed those people and has no memory of exactly how she did it and how she escaped. But she's completely healed, and this memory loss, it obviously has something to do with the baby. So it just really shows that this baby is really special, and it's not just a hybrid baby. It's able to protect itself and its mother. So that was really interesting, and also her being betrayed by the witch was really interesting too. I don't know, you know, when they were in the forest, Haley said that they're like witches or warlocks or whatever. So this specific woman, Agnes, I believe her name was, she betrays Haley and tries to get the doctor to do the same. And I'm really curious to see how that plays out in upcoming episodes because as bad as things are already, with Klaus against Marcel and him having to do all this espionage crap, and then they have Davina to worry about. It's just gonna add so much more crap when they come in with the fact that the witches are going to be split up into two factions too. So some of them might end up working with Marcel just to try to kill, Klaus and Haley, or they could end up, going off on their own because technically they are powerful enough to kill, any vampire if they use their magic. So, who knows how that'll play out. And obviously it won't be Sophie because obviously if Haley was murdered, then Sophie would be murdered. So she'll definitely have something to say about it. And it could also, play into the fact that the other witch was killed in the last episode. And, when Sophie mentions how she was basically, she wasn't just sitting on her butt like the other woman, who might have been Agnes. Of course, I wasn't paying attention to who she was talking to at the time, but that could have been Agnes. So, in next week's episode or whenever they get to it, that could be, her sole reason was like, you're obviously not looking out for your own kind anymore since you've tied yourself to the wolf, so we're kind of going to take you out so that we can protect ourselves. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out with warring witch factions and warlocks if they actually come into it, because I don't think we've had that even in the Vampire Diaries. I don't think there are any like actual warlocks. It's all been witches, so it'd actually be kind of cool to see a real warlock come into the show. Or I doubt they call them wizards. That would be funny, but it'd be cool to get an actual warlock in the show as a main character, because like I said, they never done an actual warlock. They always focus on specifically witches, and any guy that's ever been related to a witch, like in the Vampire Diaries, is always just a regular human. So it would be really cool to see that come into play, at least in this show, because I don't think that'll really happen in the Vampire Diaries. But either way, I think it'll be really cool to see a sort of warring faction of the witches, and then obviously Klaus and Marcel are gonna fight, and then Davina, and I'm sure Elijah won't be able to fix any problems, if any, or I don't think he'll be able to fix all the problems, if any. And it'll be really cool to see just how he tries, but I think ultimately it's gonna fail. And something else that really stood out to me is the fact that Marcel, he's already kind of losing his group, and it's very small right now, of course, and it's just one guy. But after he killed his friend, or after he buried him and sent him to the garden, the other guy who kind of had a little bit of focus in last week's episode, he has a huge focus in this, pretty much as the voice of his people going against him, or at least the beginning of a revolution, pretty much. And he's mad that his friend got sent to the garden because he felt like he didn't deserve it, and he feels like Marcel is just showing off for Klaus. So I'm really excited to see how that plays out. I'm sure it won't have too much of an effect really soon, but I feel like that guy will end up being pretty important because he was the first one to voice his concerns and talk about the fact that he was mad that that happened. So I think he'll end up being the one who kind of tries to start things over, and he'll eventually end up working with Klaus, which would be really cool to see. Plus, the guy Klaus has, in Marcel's group, seems like he is kind of, he's obviously getting a little bit more time, and it was just small little things here and there. Like all that happened was like when Marcel snapped the guy's neck and everyone turned around. He didn't, so Marcel specifically spoke to him. But little stuff like that is kind of how he's gonna end up getting a daylight ring. So it'll be cool to see, how long that actually takes, and if Klaus will be able to actually enact his plan before that happens. But I'm sure it won't, because then the show would kind of be over. But I love the episode, and then of course the ending. Um, After we find out that Cammy's brother was the one who massacred all those people in the church, I thought, it seemed fairly simple at first, and then, they get into the fact that it easily could be vampires, which makes sense. Like as soon as I saw it, I thought it could be vampires. It just makes perfect sense that it would be, and it could, of course, also be a witch. I would assume they do have, mind control spells, even if they're temporary. But someone did cause him to do that, and what Klaus said at the end of the episode, and it was a really emotional scene, which I didn't expect at all. But he was crying, and he mentioned, or at least tearing up, and he mentions how he was trying to pretty much honor Elijah, which I thought was a really interesting line, because he had to worry about Haley when Rebecca said she was lost. So he had that worry, but it didn't seem like it until they actually had the scene when she actually comes back, and then you really see how he's worried, and then of course he goes off to Cammy, and he feels like he can talk to her because she will pretty much just forget everything, so she won't be able to go and tell everyone else how he's feeling really bad about some of the things that are going on, and that he is actually really scared about losing Haley and the baby, and even losing Elijah's trust, because Elijah's kind of the glue to like their little family. But he was worrying about honoring him, and she worries, she says, what about my brother and my twin brother? We grew up and had a bond our whole lives. And Klaus wipes her memory, even though she doesn't want it, but he wipes her memory and says, it's a shame, but you won't do anything about it, and once I find out who did it, I will kill them. So I thought that was a really interesting promise for someone like Klaus to make, but it's really good, and it just shows how connected he is to her. And I'm still really interested to see how that plays out, because something's gonna happen. He's like gonna kiss her, and then Marcel will see, and hopefully it won't be too much like Vampire Diaries, but I'm sure it won't, because they'll just kill a bunch of people and they'll be too totally different. But overall, I thought this was a really great episode. I'm excited for next week based off the preview, because they're Klaus and Marcel are flat out talking about Davina, so I'm excited to see how that plays out. But comment below, let me know what you thought of this episode, favorite parts, least favorite parts, and what are you most excited for? Is it Klaus having a one-up on Davina, or is it the fact that Elijah's back? Because I feel like that's more exciting to me, but that's like right now. I think in the long run, Klaus having one on Davina is going to be huge for the show. But comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.